Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and this time I am building the Boost BT-50 model rocket by Mach1 Rocketry. And as you can see here, this is a fiberglass rocket, and this is a pretty good kit to introduce yourself to fiberglass rocketry because it goes together much like a regular model rocket does, except that you're going to use epoxy instead of wood glue for most of your connections. So if you've never worked with epoxy before, this will be an introduction to it. Alright, now the instructions on this are pretty minimal, so it assumes that you've already got some rocketry know-how. Alright, so we're going to go through here and check our parts list. So we've got, and this is a really generic parts list too, so it just says size tubing, so that's our body tube there. We've got a nose cone, which for this one should be a 5:1, looks like. Okay, so we've got that here. In mine, the decal is rolled up into the nose cone there, like that. Okay, and then we've got our fins. Okay, now this has two sets of fins as a large set and then a smaller set that attaches forward of those. All right, again, these are all fiberglass. All right, and then we've got a little small parts package here. We've got a Kevlar shock cord, the base plate for the nose cone, motor mount with centering rings, 3/8 inch launch lug, and some little tiny nylon screws. Looks like perhaps as shear pins. We'll have to see what those are used for here. And the motor mount already has the engine clip there assembled to that. So I'll peek inside here for just a moment. Okay, so this is dry fitted all together, but it is not glued. Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to want to do right away is whenever you're working with the fiberglass parts, I recommend wearing gloves, because anywhere you've got a rough edge, you're going to have little glass fibers, and those get into your skin, and those can be itchy and or painful, and it takes a while to work them out. We'll also want to go through and wash all of the fiberglass pieces in soapy dishwater, and that's to remove thin layers of oil that were placed on here to get them to release from the molds. Now this engine, yeah, probably better do this too, so we'll need to disassemble the engine mount and wash it, and we'll also wash all the fins. Okay, and then any place that we're going to be attaching fiberglass to fiberglass, or even fiberglass to plastic, we're going to roughen up those areas with some sandpaper, and then this just helps the epoxy hold on to the surface better. If you've got a really smooth surface, it has less to bond to. Okay, so other than that, it doesn't tell us a whole much more about how to build this, except some very, very basic things about assembling the motor mount and attaching the shock cord to that. So if this is your first time on a fiberglass rocket, I hope this is of great benefit to you. I'm going to go ahead and clear this stuff away, wash my fiberglass, and then we'll come back. My fiberglass parts are drying from being washed, and so I'm going to go ahead and assemble the nose cone. And this is one of the parts that will go together just like any other model rocket. You might want to just take a little bit of sandpaper and sand the inside just a little bit there, just to give the glue a better grip. You can do the same thing here. I'm using 100 grit. Pretty much anything that you have on hand will work. Alright, because this stuff is supposed to melt with the glue. So here I'm just going to use a tube type plastic cement. Okay, and we're just going to run a bead right on the inside of there. All right. You want a nice even bead, but not a lot of excess or you'll melt the plastic. Alright, and then we'll just put the base in, give it a turn back and forth here to seat it, and then set that aside to dry. Now, looking at the illustration on the package, it doesn't give us a lot of detail about the fins. It looks like they're spaced approximately like this. Okay, so, and then the body tube is about like that. Okay, where it's leaving a little bit here. Now if you want, and I think I may end up doing this, I may end up putting the fins all the way back flush with the body tube there, and then putting the front fin about 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters in front of that. So here the first thing I'm going to do is mark where the fins are going to go. And I'm using this fin marking guide by Estes. And so we're going to do this. This is a 4-fin rocket. Alright, so we're going to have a fin here. And one here. One in the back there. And one here. Okay, and then pull this back, and then I'm going to use this tube marking guide to extend those lines. If you don't have one of these, you can use a door frame or a drawer edge. I'm just going to draw this about 1/3 of the way up. Alright, and then I'm going to make a spot in between here, just kind of arbitrarily, for my launch lug. And I'm going to draw that line even further up the rocket. Now I'm going to use a fin alignment guide here. This is 3D printed. I just got it off one of the big 3D printing libraries. I don't remember who put it up there, but it's a really handy one. And so we can use this by sliding it on here. Alright, and this will help keep our fins perfectly aligned so that we actually do get true 90-degree separation between them. And I need to turn this around. Alright, so what will happen here is when we put our fins in, they'll just go in a little slot like that, and we can adjust it to where we want it to there. So you can, like I said, I'm probably going to put mine flush with the aft end, but if you want to include that little bit of space there, and theoretically doing this will improve your aerodynamics a little bit. Okay, so you can put it there. But the reason I'm using this is because none of our glues are going to stick really quickly here. Okay, so when you're working with wood glue and balsa and cardboard, wood glue gets tacky within about half a minute, and you can just pop that on there. The fiberglass, being much more dense, is going to tend to want to fall over. So it's going to need to be held in place for a longer period of time. And using one of these little fin alignment guides is going to help tremendously with that. To prepare for mounting the fins, we're going to need to roughen the fiberglass any place that the glue is going to go. And so I'm just going to first of all take a fin here and use it as a guide So if I put my fin flush with the aft end of the body tube, it's going to go to there. And I'm going to do this with each of the lines, except for the launch lug line. Okay, and then the little fins here are going to go beyond that. And I said there's no specific measurement in the instructions, but the main fins look like they're coming up at 8 centimeters. So I'm going to do the smaller fins at 9.5 centimeters here. So I'll just make another line there. Okay, so I've got that all the way around, and then I'll make yet another line where that fin goes. So I'm going to start at that 9.5 centimeter line and just put a front line here and do that for every fin line. And so what I'll do next is I'm going to use some coarse sandpaper. They recommend in the instructions to use 60 grit. I'm probably going to use 80 or 100. But that's just going to, again, give a better surface area for the glue to stick. And then I'm also going to roughen, not necessarily the edge here, but right along here, about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch up the fin. That's where my epoxy fillets are going to go. Okay. Now you can treat these like balsa fins and actually put in a rounded edge or a knife edge there. But do be careful, if you put this at a knife edge taper, it will be sharp, and so that may cause damage to someone picking up the rocket. I'm just going to leave mine squared off the way it is. I'm not looking for altitude records here. Okay, but you may want to, on the root edge, go ahead and hit that with some rough sandpaper as well. And again, it's mainly just to help that thing stick to the body tube. Well, it turns out that I actually do have some 60 grit sandpaper in the pile. And so now what I'm going to do is just scratch along here. Try and keep along the line as much as you can. Okay, and if you end up erasing your line, we can draw it in again later. I do recommend gloves like I'm wearing here. I'm also wearing a dust mask because you really don't want the fiberglass fibers in your lungs. Alright, and I'm just going to do this all the way around. Okay, now I did figure out the little screw thingies in here are micro rail buttons. I have never used a micro rail, although I've used other rail buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and just use the launch lug for this. So I'll just take that out as well. Alright, and this whole rocket tube, let's see how long this is 18 inches, or about almost 46 centimeters. So just kind of by experienced estimation here, I'm going to guess that the center of gravity on this, when it's all done, is probably going to be right around at 15 centimeters. So I'm just going to put that mark there. And then take my launch lug here, put that on, and then I'm going to go ahead and scratch that area as well. Okay. And now I keep a little squirt bottle of rubbing alcohol here, and just so I can wipe off the sanding dust. This may also take some of the graphite off, so be careful. Alright, and then on my fins here, I'm going to, as I said, we're going to need to scratch these as well. So first of all, just run the root edge over the sandpaper a couple of times. Alright, and then I'm just going to scratch right along the edge there on both sides. Again, you don't want to go too far because you want to hide the scratches with the fillets later. And then do the same thing for the little fins here. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of the fins, but I'll do that off camera. Alright, the fins are all sanded, and I'm going to do the same thing for the launch lug here. Now, something I forgot to mention, just because I wear impact resistant glasses all the time, but when you're sanding the fiberglass, it's a good idea to wear safety glasses as well, because you don't want this in your eyeballs either. Alright, so just roughing up my launch lug here as well. Now the launch lug is not fiberglass, it's cardboard. Okay. Alright, now we've got some choices here. Okay, so depending on how comfortable you are with these various epoxies, you don't necessarily have to use the ones they show here. Now I do recommend for tacking the fins on that you use a gel type super glue rather than 5-minute epoxy, and the reason for that is you're going to waste a lot of epoxy. For these ones, 15-minute if you have it is probably fine as well. The trade-offs here are that the longer the epoxy sets, the stronger it is. But this is not a very big rocket, and so if you're used to working with epoxy and can work quickly with it, you could use 5-minute throughout this. Okay, I'm going to use a variety of epoxies depending on the part here. So I'm going to start then with the main fins. So I'm going to set this stuff aside. Alright, and I've got this kind of general purpose stand here, and I'm going to go ahead and attach my fin alignment guide. Alright, if you're not going to use this, then just be prepared to be holding on to fins a lot. Let me put it on the right direction here. Okay. And again, working with epoxies, I recommend wearing gloves because repeated exposure to epoxy can cause allergic reactions. Okay, so here I'm going to use a gel type super glue. Alright, and these fins are bilaterally symmetrical here, so as long as you got the root edge down on the rocket, it doesn't matter which way you've got them turned. Okay, so this is just to tack them in place. This is not going to give it a lot of strength, but this is much more efficient for just putting the fins on than trying to do it with epoxy. Alright, so just a nice even bead of the super glue there, And then we're going to put that right on our line. Okay, and that's all nicely lined up. To make sure that you're flush with the aft end, you can use a ruler or other flat object and just pop that right up against it. That's really good super glue. Okay. So I'm just going to let that sit there for about 5 minutes, and then I can go to each of the other fins, again waiting about 5 minutes between each one. And so I will do the other main fins off camera, and when I come back we'll do the forward fins as well. While the glue on my fins is drying, we can go ahead and assemble the motor mount. Now the shock cord that comes with this is not very long. It's according to the instructions, it's about 4 feet, all right, which is about a foot shorter than I would want at a minimum for this type of a rocket. Now they are assuming that this is a base shock cord. Essentially this is going to be something that you hook to the motor mount, and it sticks far enough out the rocket that you can attach it then to an extension type of shock cord, whether that's Kevlar or elastic or whatever you want to use. Okay, so just keep that in mind. You're going to want to have some other bit of shock cord to put on this, or if you have shock cord material, you can go ahead and just replace this with that shock cord material, which is what I'm going to do. Now, according to the label on this, this rocket is 32 inches long, and I think that's an exaggeration because we already measured the body tube and it's only 18 inches long, and this nose cone, the part you're going to see, is only 4.5 inches long, so it's 22 inches long, not 32 inches long. And so if we use the rule of thumb going by body tube length, we want something that's at least 3 times the length. So I'm just going to extend that out and say it's 2 feet long and I want 6 feet of shock cord. So I've got some 350-pound test shock cord here, which I believe is pretty close to the same thickness as what came with it. It's certainly more than heavy enough for this rocket. So I'm just going to measure out here 6 feet. Alright, give me a little extra space for knots and such. Alright, I'll just cut that off. Okay, and now I'm going to take some regular type super glue and I'm going to put it on the ends of these. Just a little dab on each. And this will just keep them from unraveling. Okay, don't even have to wait for it to dry. Just take a tissue and wipe off the excess. If it's still a little bit sticky to you, then just hit it with some alcohol, which I can do right here. Alright, and that will accelerate the super glue hardening. Okay, and then once you got to that point, you can just cut the little frayed bits right off. Okay. Okay, so now we need one of the rings here. So of the 2 centering rings, both of them have a wide slot for the engine clip, but the forward ring also has a little smaller slot there, and that's going to be for our shock cord. This is simply going to fit under that notch like this. Alright, and then we'll have the ring in place like that. Okay, and then the engine clip will go in here. Okay, this is going to go down right over the engine clip, and then what we'll do is we're going to put a fillet of epoxy around that, and I'm going to wrap the shock cord like this so that it's embedded in that epoxy. Okay, and we can do that right now. Alright, so one of the things we're going to do then is roughen this one up a little bit. right around where that epoxy fillet's going to be. And if you get a little carried away there, nobody's going to see it. And then while we're doing this, I'm also going to put the other ring on, and we'll put that up about 2.5 centimeters. Okay, should be about there. That's an inch to you non-metric people. Okay, so right about in there, and it doesn't have to be exact. All right, so we'll go ahead and roughen that area up a little bit too. Okay. So I am going to use some 15-minute epoxy here. That'll give me some increased working time and strength, but I won't have to wait quite as long as I would with 30-minute. Alright, now I don't need to make up a whole lot here, just a gram or two. Okay, and here I'm just going to use the end of a cotton applicator and mix this up. See, that's going to give us more than enough epoxy for the engine mount. Alright, and just keep mixing until it has a uniform consistency. This one doesn't have a lot of different color to it, so it's kind of hard to do it that way. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the aft ring. I need to make sure that this is completely parallel here. Okay, and then I'm just going to run a fillet around this. And being careful not to get it up on the outside of the engine ring there, because we don't want it interfering with the body tube. But when I push this forward to its resting position, it will push that epoxy up into a nice fillet. So we'll just move that up. Okay, and I'm going to do a quick comparison here. Make sure we're where we're at. Yep, that's an inch or 2.5 centimeters. Okay, so that's a good spot there. Alright, and now, as I mentioned, we're going to put this one on. Kind of the same fashion here. So I want to trap the shock cord in that little notch, just like that, and I'm going to move that down here. Alright, and I want enough shock cord on this end that I can go around almost to the engine retainer, but not all the way. Okay, so I want this to come around just like that. Okay. So here I'm going to go ahead and put the epoxy here now on the forward end of this, so that when I scoot it up, we'll be almost on the end of the engine clip there. That one up to where it goes. And now I'm going to put another one on the aft end that I'll sink the shock cord into. Now we'll see if that's enough. We're going to put some tension on that and wrap it all the way around. It's actually a little bit longer than I wanted now. That's alright, it's still fitting. Okay. And I'm going to make sure that my engine clip is still parallel there. Now I'm going to get a little bit of masking tape here. Put that on. And that'll just kind of hold everything down while the epoxy hardens. Maybe. Masking tape does not stick to epoxy, but it will stick to itself. Theoretically. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to let that dry now for about the next hour. The epoxy has set on my motor mount here, and we got a little bit of slop over onto the rings there, but if necessary we can sand that back. Otherwise, this came out about like I expected it to, so we've now got a really good, strong mount to my shock cord, and the engine retainer clip here is in good condition. It still moves out of the way, but it's good and firm in there. So I'm going to set that aside. Up here on the Rocket, the super glue has set on the fins. Alright, I haven't even peeked at this yet, so that came out pretty square. Alright, now the advantage of using super glue is if you find that you got one of these in the wrong position, like for example, I got a little bit of creep back here and the fins just come over the edge there of the aft end. Now, I'm not going to reposition the fins, I'll just sand those off a little bit later. But if you got one on crooked or it's canting over to one side or the other, you can apply some acetone to that super glue and wiggle that fin off and then just clean off the excess super glue with acetone. And then you can reapply it again. Alright, now for this one, what we're going to do next is add the other fins up front. Okay, and I'm going to go put some gloves on for working with the scratched up fiberglass there, and then we will mount the front fins. Once those have dried, we'll go ahead and insert the motor mount and apply the epoxy fillets. Now, just like I did with the main fins, I'm going to attach the forward fins using some gel type super glue here. Alright, and I've repositioned my fin alignment guide so that it can now be used in that forward position. Alright, come on glue, there we go. Okay, and we already scratched this up beforehand, so now I'm just going to insert this here. Alright, I'm going to line it up with my mark here at the back as well as with the front there. Okay, and just like I did before, I'm going to let that dry for about 5 minutes and then move to the next one and repeat that for all the other 3 fins. I'm going to let that thoroughly dry and then we'll come back and do the fillets. I'm going to come back to the engine mount here while the fins are drying, and this uses part of the engine clip there in the forward position as the engine block. And I've seen a lot more kits of late that have been doing this, and I'm not sure I quite trust it. I'm always afraid that this is going to corrode out over time and then we'll lose it. So I'm going to actually add an engine block ring to this. This does not come with the kit, but I have some extra ones. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and use some more of the thick super glue here, since we're doing dissimilar surfaces. This is just a little added measure of safety. It's not required for flight. Alright, so I'm just going to stick that right down inside there, kind of turn it as I go in. Nice thing about fiberglass, you can see what you're doing. Okay. And then I'm going to take an applicator here and just wipe out the excess glue that's down in there. There we go. Okay, now we're pretty much ready for this to go in. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to thread the shock cord back down through the motor mount here. And then line it up where it comes out. Okay, Okay, and the idea here is that this will keep the shock cord from getting any epoxy on it as we put it into the rocket here. Alright, so I've got all the 4 fins on in that forward position now. I'm just allowing them to dry longer. So first I'm just going to do a dry fit here and make sure that this goes in. Okay, and I prefer to have my engine clip on the same side as the launch lug. So this is my launch lug line there. Okay, so that fits in fairly well. Alright, and I'm going to put that back in just for a minute because I want to mark where that forward engine ring is so that I can apply the epoxy directly on that area instead of back here really far where I'm going to have to push through it. Okay, so I'm going to take that back out. I'm going to use 15-minute epoxy again on this. You can use 30 if you like. 5, unless you're really good and quick at doing this, might be a bit too short. Okay, so we'll just go ahead, and again, we don't need a whole lot. Here I'm going to go ahead and use the applicator end of this. Just be aware that you can only do this a couple of times before it unravels too much. You end up with cotton all through your epoxy. Alright, I'm just going to gather some up here. And I'm going to insert this without touching the walls initially till I get just below the line I made there. And now I can just rotate that around inside. And that's just going to give me the epoxy only where I need it. Okay, a little bit more there, just for good measure. Alright, and here's also where we want the longer working time, because now what I'm going to do is take the motor mount here, alright, and I'm going to slide that in, but not into the epoxy yet. And what I'm going to do now is take another applicator, get a bit more of my epoxy here, and I'm going to put this right inside the aft end of the body tube so that it will only be applied to this aft ring. And I'm just bending that tube back and forth to give me the clearance that I need. Alright, I'm getting a little sloppy on the motor mount, but it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, and then a little bit getting out on the surface of the body tube. We'll clean that up with ethanol here just a little bit. Alright, so now I'm going to come back and find my launch lug line there. Alright, and now I can slide this all the way in. I'm going to use my ruler here as a flat surface. Alright, and just put that even with the aft end of the rocket. Okay, and now you can use some alcohol. It can be ethanol or rubbing alcohol. And just use that to remove any epoxy that got out where you don't want it to be. Okay, so epoxy, when it hasn't hardened yet, can be removed with alcohol. Super glue can be removed with acetone. And if you treat super glue with alcohols, it'll actually cause it to harden faster. Okay, so you get a chemistry lesson along with the rocket here. Alright, now I'm going to let this completely dry, and then we'll be able to put the shock cord back up through it. I can go ahead and take off the engine or the fin alignment guide, and now I'm going to go ahead and add the launch lug here, since I still have a little bit of epoxy left. So I'll go ahead and take some of this epoxy that we've got left from the motor mount. I'm going to apply that to my launch lug where I scratched it up. And if you prefer to use super glue for this step, that's fine, as long as you go ahead and support it with some fillets. Alright, and now we're going to put this right on here. Okay, and make sure it's straight, because it's going to be really hard to reposition it once it's dried. Okay, so go ahead and look down through, sight along the line and the rocket, and we'll look down from above, and everything looks straight. Okay, so I'm just going to let this whole thing dry for at least an hour before I come back to do the fillets. The super glue on the fins is dry, and now I've masked off 2 facing fins here and mixed up a batch of 15-minute epoxy. Now when you do this, you're going to want to have some alcohol handy. Just regular rubbing alcohol is fine, but we're going to use that as we smooth out our fillets. Alright, so I'm going to apply a fillet here and here. Some people like to have this forward masking tape just ahead a little bit so that the fillet goes around. Since this is such a small rocket though, I'm going to just go up to the edges there. Okay, so here we're going to take a bit of epoxy. And I'm just going to use I'm using a popsicle stick or craft stick here. And just kind of smooth that in. Just like that. Do the same thing over here. Again, you can use 30-minute epoxy on this, which is actually what Mach1 recommends. If you are really good at epoxying, you could even use 5-minute, although it's not going to be as strong. Okay, as the epoxy kind of settles into place there, I'm going to take my glove here and just moisten it with a little bit of alcohol. Alright, but you want a good obvious coating of alcohol there. And now I'm going to use my finger with the alcohol to smooth that in. So just like if you're using fillets on a paper and wood rocket, you're doing the same thing here. Okay, and now the excess that gets smoothed out of there is caught on the masking tape. Now I'm going to let this harden for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and take the masking tape off. About 5 minutes have passed, so now I'm going to remove the masking tape here. Okay, and I'm going to continue to allow this to harden with the rocket in a horizontal position. This is going to take a lot of patience, especially if you're using 30-minute epoxy. You want these to harden for that full time indicated on your epoxy before you go on to the next one. So this is going to need to wait at least 15 minutes before I go on to the next set of facing fins. I'm also going to do just a little bit of cleanup here. So again, a little bit of alcohol here, and I'm just going to work this. Look like a little bit of epoxy had kind of slid over where I didn't want it. Okay, so 15 minutes, and then I'm going to flip these over and do the next set of facing fins and continue in that pattern, and I'll do that off camera. My epoxy fillets on the main fins are done, and I've also done the same thing up here on the launch lug, although I didn't use the masking tape, I just free-handed it. Now for the small fins, it's kind of tight. I could freehand some epoxy fillets in there, but instead what I'm going to do is use some more gel-type super glue. Alright, because these are small fins, they don't have a lot of pressure on them, they really don't contribute significantly to the stability of the rocket. And so using a similar technique that I did with epoxy, I'm going to do the same thing with gel super glue, but instead of ethanol as a smoothing agent, I'm going to use acetone. Okay, so here again I'm going to use the gel type super glue. I'm just going to run a fillet in here. And this does not need to be really thick. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing on the facing fin next to it. Okay, now I'm going to smooth it once just with my glove finger here. And do the other side as well. Okay, and I'm going to wipe that off my glove. And I'm dipping my finger here of the glove in some acetone. I'm shaking most of that out. I just want a thin film of acetone here. And do this really quickly. We don't want the acetone to sit there for long. Okay, just enough to allow it to smooth out there. Looks like I need a little bit more smoothing right there. Okay? And this you can go ahead and go on to the next fin within about a minute. All right, so I'm going to do the other fins in the same fashion off camera and then come back. While the fillets are drying, I'm going to install the streamer here, and this just comes as a length of ripstop nylon. And in many cases this will come with a little hole kind of melted into this that you can just pass the shock cord through. This one did not, so we've got a couple of options. You can tie this around the shock cord with a double knot. Kind of looks ugly. You can also do the opposite and tie the shock cord around this. What I'm going to do is go ahead and melt a small hole in the nylon here and then pass my shock cord through that. Now since I'm in a laboratory setting, I've got this nichrome wire here, and just off camera I've got a Bunsen burner. I don't want to put it under my camera as that would kill my camera. All right, but I can just heat this up to red hot and then poke a hole through there. Alright, you can do the same thing if you just have a piece of steel wire, hold it in a pair of pliers or a clamp so you don't burn your finger, and then just heat it up with a butane lighter. Okay, the nice thing about burning a hole like that is it automatically seals the edges and it won't fray. So now I can just run my shock cord in there. Okay. And then I can just put this to wherever I want it. Generally, I'm just going to put it down, just 20 centimeters or so from the cap, or the nose cone, and then the rest of this will go in, followed by the streamer there. So now I need my nose cone. All right, now I'm going to do this only loosely because when I go to paint this, I may do the nose cone a different color. Alright, but when you're ready to do this, just go ahead and tie a double knot here onto the nose cone's eyelet. Okay, and since this is Kevlar, it does tend to unravel fairly easily. So go ahead and pull that into position. You want just a little material here on the free end of that knot, but not right up next to it. And then what I recommend is just putting a little drop of super glue right on that knot to lock it in place. Okay, and then all we have to do here is fold up the streamer, and the easiest way to do that is just to fold it back upon itself a couple of times here. This has got a lot of static electricity on it, so it's making it a little harder. Okay, but you can just keep folding it until it becomes a manageable size, and then just kind of roll it up on itself. Alright, and then we just take our shock cord here, gather it up. Alright, I'll put that in there. Okay, now something else that this does not come with that you might want to think about is a streamer protector or reusable wadding. There are several outfits that sell it. You can also make your own. And so here I just used a piece of ripstop Nomex, put a binding stitch around it, and then made a buttonhole in there, and so I can put that on as well. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. If you just go into any of the model rocket supply places, especially those that carry mid-power stuff, you'll find these. Just look it up under parachute protector or reusable wadding. And so this will go on much like the streamer did. Okay, it just goes on first, and then we can go ahead and put our streamer back on. Like that. Okay, and again here I'm just going to fold this up a few times to make it manageable. Okay, and then you just take this protector and you kind of wrap it around like that, and then stick that whole thing in, and now you don't need to worry about disposable wadding. You just use that every time. And then again you'll tie this back on and then put that in place. Okay, like with any model rocket, you want to give it a shake test here to make sure that nose cone is not too loose. That's pretty good there. Alright, now I am not going to paint this in this video because the weather's been kind of screwy around here right now. Alright, but once this dries, I'll give it a very fine sanding to kind of even out the fillets and such, remove any imperfections, prime it, and paint it. So with that, this rocket is done. And really, this went together just like a balsa and cardboard rocket would, except we're using some more advanced adhesives, and you need to have a couple of solvents on hand, especially acetone and some rubbing alcohol. But other than that, the skills are pretty much the same as you would use with another model rocket. So with that, I hope you have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.